All right, so we are going to derive the quadratic formula by completing the square. And if you can see here, I have any equation in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c, and we're just going to keep our parameters as a, b, and c. So the first step that I like to do is get rid of this constant term. So I'm going to subtract c on both sides. So now I'm left with ax squared plus bx equals negative c. Now, technically, you don't have to do this next step, but I really prefer to complete the square without a coefficient on the x squared term. So I'm going to divide the whole equation by a. And that, remember, that means divide every single term in this equation by a. So that turns into x squared plus b over a x equals negative c over a. Now we've done all the preparations that we need to do before we complete the square. So now we can complete the square. So the way we do that is we take the coefficient of the x term here, which is b over a, then we divide it by 2, and then we square that. So I'm going to move over here. So if we had b over a as our coefficient, we need to divide that by 2. But if you remember, dividing by 2 and multiplying by 1/2 is the same thing. Okay, so then this becomes b over 2a, and then I need to square this. Okay, so the quantity b over 2a all squared, that is equal to b squared over 4a squared. Okay, so this is the value that I need in order to complete the square. But it actually makes more sense to add this because this b over 2a is going to come in handy when we are factoring. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add this b squared over 4a squared on the right side, and then add the factored version b over 2a quantity squared on the left side. Remember, they're the exact same thing, so I can still add them on both sides, but they're just written in different ways. So if I zoom out here, I can rewrite this as plus the quantity b over 2a squared, and then over here I will add b squared over 4a squared. Remember, they're the exact same thing. All right, so now I'm going to zoom back in, and I have x squared plus b over a x plus b over 2a quantity squared equals negative c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. All right, now I can factor this. This is now a perfect square trinomial. So this factors in the form of x plus b over 2a quantity squared. And now, on the right side of this equation, I can technically get myself a common denominator. If we see that we have a 4a squared here, I can multiply this denominator by 4a, because then that would give me 4 times a, aka 4 times a squared. So if I multiply the top and bottom here, I'll zoom in, by 4a, that will give me a common denominator. So I'll zoom back out, and I get this factored form right here equals negative 4ac over 4a squared plus b squared over 4a squared. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put this all under one denominator, and then I'm going to change the order of I'm going to have it be b squared minus this 4ac, just to make it look a little nicer so we don't start with a negative. So I'll keep the left side the same, x plus b over 2a. And then this is going to equal b squared minus 4ac over our common denominator, which is 4a squared. All right, now what I want to do is I want to take the positive and negative square root of both sides to cancel out this quantity squared on the left side. So I'm going to rewrite it as plus or minus. I like to do plus or minus on both sides. You only technically need to do it on one side, but I preach that you have to do whatever you do on one side, you have to do on the other. So I just like to write it this way. So anyway, this will cancel into just x plus b over 2a. And then this becomes plus or minus. And then if you remember, you can take the square root of the top of a fraction and the square root of the bottom of the fraction when you have it inside the fraction. So this becomes plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over the square root of 4a squared. But the square root of 4a squared, well, a squared is a perfect square, and 4 is a perfect square, so that is just 2a. So I get x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over, like I said, this just becomes 2a. All right, the last step to solve for x is to just get rid of this plus b over 2a. So I'll subtract that on both sides. And I'm going to rewrite this as I'll write this term first because we have our plus or minus to start with. So I have x equals negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And we see we have another pair of common denominators. So I can just combine this all into one denominator. So now I get x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And this right here will give me my solutions to any quadratic equation in standard form, where a is the coefficient of the x squared term, b is the coefficient of the x term, and then c is the constant. So these are the solutions. Remember, there's going to be two solutions in almost every case. The only case where there won't be two solutions is if this quantity, which is actually called the discriminant, is 0. And then if this discriminant is negative, then you'll actually have two complex solutions. But this will give you the solutions to any quadratic equation.